Okay, thanks, Mark Nuts, for coming back once again. I love to see such a big crowd of everyone, lots of familiar faces here. So, welcome. And I think we're going to just kind of get right into it here. We have 3 accomplished women that are in the gallery this month, and they're going to hop up and tell you a bit about their art and their process. And I imagine there'll be some time for questions if anybody has any of those. So I think we were going to start it off with Jennifer Anable, and then after that will be Caryn, and then Jean will finish it off for us. So I think that's about all I got. So yeah.
Thank you for being here. It's really fun to have a crowd to talk to about this. Hi, Joe. Definitely, thank you for coming. It's kind of excited to be filled with a room of people that are art lovers and appreciators. So we all, as artists, get this audience to look at our work. So I'm really excited about that. I want to thank also the gallery for putting together a really nice show. It's beautiful. Thank you, gallery crew, for everything. It's great, and for inviting me in the first place to show work here. I have not seen this work outside my studio, so it's been really nice to see it in a new space. And working with ceramics, there's always a lot of change and transformation, and so I was thinking these were going to be really small. And it's really nice to see them, and they didn't completely disappear. Just, the ceramic idea of it. I'm really happy to see them here. Part of that is that I make these pieces for my audience. I'm making them for myself, but they are to be viewed by an audience. I mean, that's how the work is completed, is with the audience. And I say that because it's, I think it's Marcel Duchamp, who was talking about the transference, right? Where there's art's threefold to be completed. You have the artist, the creation of it, right? The idea. Then there's the process, which things happen in process, and then the viewer is that what absorbs what's happened. And so these being so abstract, I didn't want to give anything. I guess I wanted to provide something open-ended where people could come with their own sense of it. So it's playful. For me, it's coming from many different things, but generally it was the same process that I'll go into about it. But they were really made to give a little bit of experience to the audience, to the people who own it or have it. They're designed in a bit to be viewed intimately. So they were made at a scale, they're a certain scale, and I'm building these forms. And so I guess the end result, I'm really still wanting that expression of, they are fragile, so you can't just pick them up and throw them around, but they were designed without like a top or a bottom or a side there, right? They were designed to, you can do what you want with them, kind of thing, right? So I didn't want to necessarily give too much. And for me, it was really about the process and letting the process give that concept and stuff back to you. I didn't want to do too much, but be involved and make those decisions. And so, not that I need to go back to my notes, but I think part of the idea was to not. Every professor I've had has told me that I overthink. You think too much. And they're like, stop thinking, start making, stop thinking. So this was a really lovely exercise, and like, I'm not going to think about it, I'm just going to start building these forms. Of course, they start telling you things once you start, but it was really lovely to go one step at a time with building these forms. So I can't give you any meaning to them in my intention, except for that they came about because I was really trying to stay in an intuitive way and letting them unfold, for me as well. things came in as they were going, and each one I learned something. So they were very, there's kind of like, they're a little family, I guess. And you learn, like, I have some photos, I can pass them around. This is an image of Monster over there with the cardboard. Just throw that around the audience, I'll put it back up. So that's with the cardboard, and that first one I put together with glue from a glue gun. So this whole thing, I was teaching a design class, and we were building with cardboard. And so I'm like, I want to build with cardboard. And it was really nice to start with that simple material, but then know that they were going to end up being porcelain. So the impetus was that change of value, that change of concept, by having fun and changing and working with this material that's like, I felt like the cardboard was like knitting, where you could like, oh, I need to take that apart, put that back, without damage to too much material or your time, you could spend time with it. So they each kind of came about, yeah, I lost my train of thought there. But the cardboard, and then with that one I used glue gun, and that was a Monster. That's why it's called Monster. So then I was trying to peel off the cardboard, and then you kind of had this dynamic going on where the cardboard was the mold for the porcelain slip. So these are all porcelain, and they were all cast into a cardboard mold that I made. So that's kind of the whole process that I wanted to do. Within that process, it's really fun because you put the porcelain in, and then it gets all soggy and wet, and you're trying to maintain the shape. And so I had learned a lot about the process with each piece as well. So I think for me, this work was fun because it was always processed all the time. One was going here, one was doing this. I had to like babysit them. The porcelain was poured in, poured out. That layer was dried, 12 hours later, I'm like, okay, I'll pour next layer in, pour that out. That layer had to dry. Because there was so much about the porcelain that could crack or change. So I think in this whole process, it was also starting with something simple, but then dealing with the complexities of this porcelain. And I wanted to leave them all just white and have these forms, and it was all about edges and proportion, and just what was happening with the corners and the slight changes. And I'm like working at Western, and my colleague comes by, and I'm like, look at these out of the kiln, they made it. And he's like, well, they're not done yet. I'm like, I want them to be done, but I had to glaze them. So glazing is a whole new aspect that was, you have to surface the glaze, the pieces. So the glazing you see is giving them their own personality instead of being this process I was doing. It really opened up each one. And some of them are fired 3 or 4 times. That black tower was fired maybe 6 times. I had to sandblast to clear off. It was just like this funny piece. I didn't think that would make it. And it's actually one of my favorite ones. So I think all of them have these lives that they almost didn't make it, but they made it. So I'm really happy to see them here and how they come across, because I think there's so much about the way they were put together with the cardboard, and then also that's the external. So the porcelain is capturing this internal part that I can't necessarily see. So then when it is fired, it's this new shape. So I think the whole thing was very fun to work with because I didn't know what was necessarily going to happen. And that was what I wanted in this body of work, was to just have it keep taking me somewhere else. So these are the glazes that happened. And it was pretty fun to go through some stuff. They all made it. But they were really fragile. So the next step was, how do I get someone to view them intimately? Because I made them in a very intimate scale. So I didn't ever think of bases as part of the piece. I wanted them to be this piece that was really movable, but the anxiety of hearing that noise, of picking up a piece of porcelain and putting it back on the table, was like, that has to be stopped. So in order for these to work, the bases came in, and that was a really lovely acceptance of like, okay, these have to be here, and I think they worked out well. I think I found some boards in ceramics. The good thing Ryan's not here, so he doesn't know how to like take the boards. And it was actually like an opportunity that I could use the bands. So that was more the fun about the base, is that I also had a whole new process to start with. And that was just really fun. And I was like breaking into the Western studio. I could be there, I just didn't have a key, so I had to like Lucy, Jean almost killed the tower over there. I'm watching, hold on. So nice to see you guys. So yeah, the story of the piece is that that's how the bases came about. And what's on the bases is flocking. So they use it in like jewelry boxes, or sometimes like woodworking will use it inside their drawers or something like that. But that was, again, the other idea of adding a new material, adding, a little bit of color and kind of contrasting and just making it kind of lively, really. It's in the fact that they're really open, so it's kind of up to you guys to tell me what you think, what's going on with these pieces. Again, I wasn't thinking too much, but body size in this way, I can't say that some of them started becoming towers, so there was a sense of trying to make bigger things and thinking about towers, and then they moved a little more into houses. But that's really the only sort of shape thing that started forming, where I was really trying to stay open to what was happening just with my hands and with the cardboard. And I think I covered all this stuff. Yes. Yes, please.
So you said earlier you were talking about Duchamp and the 3 stages, and shortly after there you said you didn't really have an intention. But to me, your intention seems very clear. Your intention is to be open and present during the process, and so I think that's very much an intention to have.
Yes, thank you very much. I guess I sometimes find it difficult to express that. Even when I'm in faculty, they're like, "Don't think." I'm like, you can't not think. There's always intention. So I appreciate that thought, because it is true that there is something there. But I guess it's also coming up with the letting it be, also not trying to control it. Yeah.
I was just wondering, when you transitioned from the cardboard, was there ever a consideration for working with slabs?
I have worked with slabs, and I have I think one piece or so in here. And I was really happy, and I was going to work with slabs, and the pieces I made all collapsed on me. And so I just thought that was a message from the universe saying something else. I like slab work, but this was, I think for me, it was about the molding of the object and then creating that impression of the interior. So I guess I think of like Rachel Whiteread. She does a lot of stuff where she cast like a house that was going to be torn down. So she was trying to take the interior space of something. And I think that's what directed this process. Also, this process, I saw it many years ago in a ceramic workshop about experimental ceramics. So I think I got excited about doing something different with the slip instead of the slab, because I knew that I was bad at slab. Sarah? Yeah.
So, I've asked you this before, I guess we talked a little bit about it, but I'm really interested in the abstraction of architecture and how that comes about, and I know that part of it has come about because of the process of slip painting and all that, but I guess I'd like to hear what you have to say about the abstraction of a space that is a symbol of a life.
Symbol of the life.
Well, like a home, a tower.
Sure.
So like these spaces are built for us to move around in and have experiences in, and you slip casted them, so there was never, it wasn't like you closed anything up, it was always a contained space.
There's always a contained space. And that was, I think when I was starting, and you give yourself limits as an artist. So I'm going to work with cardboard, and then cardboard you can manipulate, you can turn it, it can be curvy, it can be any shape. And the architecture, because I have an interest in architecture, I was like, okay, I'm just going to build. And so I think my mind goes to building and construction, and I just have this stupid house that I have to sit back here. But so I think that building is where I go, is architecture. And I think it's just an easy place because I took this course in theory of space and architecture, and it really made me happy about architecture, that it is something that we create more mentally with the space given us. So each interior, I just was blown away the space was more mental and physical. And these are actually me being like, I can make space physical! But it's actually very mental. So that's kind of maybe this is working architecturally, but in a zone that's like, maybe you call it personal architecture.
Yeah.
So I can go through space and...
Well, and it's emotional architecture because you talk about the intimacy you want the viewer to have by being able to pick that stuff up and not be afraid to set it down and hear that very jarring noise.
Yes.
And the fear of is an edge going to break off.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I agree. Most everything I do is emotional. Is there any more questions? Okay, awesome. Thanks. You guys are amazing.
Not new.
So I'm Caryn. I made the cloth pieces and the paper pieces and these little guys. And somewhere in here, when we were talking about the talk that we were going to do, I think it was Lucy who said, bring some of the things that you work with in your studio. Can't hear you. Oh, no! Bring some of the things that that you use in your studio or that are part of your process. And let's go on just a second here. I want to give Gina a seat. I think they're right back here. Oh, okay. Oops, sorry. Okay. Everything's good over here. So I brought I'll pass this around. Why don't you just let it go? This is my studio assistant. Okay. Richard, maybe you could come and sit up in the front.
Over here.
Yeah, well, that way he'll be okay.
I'm the third.
So I'll pass this around. This is my paint box. Actually, this is my pastel box. I'll pass that around. And it's about to get a little bit fuller because thanks to the individual who I believe is here today, who purchased the piece that says you walk in the door, I decided to purchase all 620 colors of that particular silk. So it's a beautiful silk embroidery floss that you can divide into, I think it's an 8-ply, so you can divide it into 8 single pieces, and I work with 1 strand at a time. It just sort of went from bulkier to thinner, and then this has to be thinner, like a pencil one. So this is a little bit more embroidery floss, and there's some needles that I love, and one of the things that's the most important thing is my eraser. Okay. And then my garden, these are all from, oh, I'm sorry, they aren't all from my garden. This batch is from my garden. Okay. So this is sort of my paint. Okay. This is from Cornwall Park, which is where we live right across the street from Cornwall Park. And so when Tashi and I go for walks, he's like sniffing the ground all over the place, and I'm looking at the plants and trying to decide, is this going to give off color or not? And of course, along with, is it going to give off color, I also ask, is this going to kill me because it's toxic? So that's one of the things that you have to know about when you're messing around with plants. And then my friend Tim, who's over there, who's something of a botanist, he went to the woods yesterday and got us some great plants that you can't really find locally in Bellingham that we were playing with last night. And so I actually have a whole mess of things in here that we were playing with last night. And this isn't exactly an intimate group, but I mean, it is intimate. I love that you're all here. But tomorrow I'm going to do a workshop. It's not a workshop, it'll be a demo. And I'll be able to talk a little bit more about, you know, like why each of these things happen the way they happen. It might be just getting a little bit too detailed for today, but you can get all kinds of different results when you're dyeing paper with plant materials. So, more materials, sorry. All the cloth starts like this. So, yep. Silk and wool. Oh, geez, not bad. Just bagging of things. And this is wool. It's a wool jersey. So that all starts white also. And some of it ends up too nice for me to stitch into. Like I have to kind of figure out. I can't go there. I almost like it better when it's a little bit more subtle. And I have to lead into a composition in order to clarify what's going on the surface. So you're welcome to look at any of this stuff afterwards. But what I'd like to do, because I think this whole thing with the dyes and the plants and everything might be new to a lot of people who come here, I'd like to have you ask me questions. I kind of work better that way. So, yes.
What made that wonderful orange brown on that last piece?
On the wool, that's eucalyptus.
Oh, that's
Yeah, eucalyptus is crazy stuff. It's the tannins in leaves. Is this the one? Yeah, it's the tannins in leaves that. Okay, let me back up here a little bit. There are known dye plants, okay, and a lot of them have tinctoria in the Latin name. And then there are a bunch of plants that are not dye plants, but if you put them in a bath of boiling water and you have them against like a protein fiber in particular that likes tannins, then the tannins will go from the leaf onto the material. Okay, I'm not sure if it's the tannins in eucalyptus or not. This has taken me on a completely different journey in terms of understanding botany and chemistry and all these different things. All I know is that eucalyptus is magic. And it does some really magical stuff, especially if you're working with wool. Maple's another one that's hugely, it's just fantastic. And all different kinds of maples that I've played with, that's with eucalyptus on it. But it's definitely the tannins in maple that get you there. Yes.
So what briefly is the process of transferring getting the dye out of the plant and into the fabric?
Okay, so it's called eco-bundling. I'm not all that fond of the term because it sounds like some recycling kind of thing. I like to call it contact dyeing of plants. So you take a piece of fabric, you lay it down, you lay down, I know you can't see this really, but you can imagine if someone describing it to you. You lay down your leaves. You can use flowers too, but I found that flowers stain rather than dye. They have tannin in them. So you lay your things down on your silk and then you roll it up around a dowel.
Any old dowel, or does it need to be copper?
Any old dowel, Susan. Yeah. I'm using a copper dowel here because it is said that copper is supposed to brighten things. I don't know if that has to be like free-ranging copper in your pot or if it's actually going to come off on this. But there are ways of making copper that will act as a mordant in your bath, and it's supposed to brighten the colors. And then, so what you want is a direct contact between your leaves and your fabric. So you bind it really tightly together. Okay? And then you put it in a bath of hot water. You can add other things to it. Depending on what you add to it is going to determine what your result is going to be. So you could just like start with just a bath of hot water and you simmer it for 2 hours. And then you take it out, you unroll it, see if anything happens. With some things it will, with some things it won't. Okay, like I think that eucalyptus would just jump on any piece of protein fiber that you put it with. It's just like that's how eucalyptus is. So people who live in Australia are really lucky. But other materials, like I have a whole list of different plants in here, but things like maple and let's see, this is a buddleia, so butterfly bush and cotinus, smoke bush, oak. Those are some of my favorite plants. They're all high in tannin. Tannin loves iron, okay? So if you have a little bit of iron in your water, like if you're using a rusty pot, or if you can find a way of adding it to it, and there are definitely ways of doing that, then it'll bring out more color from the tannins in the leaves. But it also darkens it. So there's all this chemistry that's going on, right? And because tannin is the thing that you're trying to get out, if you add more tannin to your water, you're going to get a better result. And then leaves and protein fabrics, like, I'm getting way too technical here, they like an acid environment. So you want to change the pH of your water, so you're just dousing some vinegar. So it's chemistry. I'm like being a little chemist right now. Yeah.
So is it fresh water?
Yeah, you want to use filtered water. And if you can, soft water, like rainwater, is really great. I have buckets in my garden when they feel like get really excited. So, but generally filtered water. Yeah. First this gentleman here, and then Sharon.
Are you doing steaming, or is it all just steaming water?
Am I doing it? No, I've tried steaming, and I didn't like the results as much as just dunking it in the water and boiling the heck out of it. So the paper can't take anywhere near as long. It's like a 30-minute simmer on that. So, yeah, sure.
So are the colors, how permanent are they? Do they fade in sunlight or?
This is a good question. So, in general, plant dyes will fade unless you have a mordant.
Oh, right.
So you can pre-mordant your cloth, which I've started doing, and I pre-mordant the alum. And you can also have a co-mordant, which means having your mordant in the plant. So a mordant is simply something that, it might bring out the color a little bit more, but it fixes, it's like a fix for the dye onto the cloth. And so iron is a mordant. So for me right now, it's like this little delicate dance of how much iron do I need to have in my bath in order to get the color to come out, but not to have it go black. Because, I mean, if you like roll this around a rusty pipe, it would deteriorate right away, right? And I want my work to not deteriorate, at least not at that rate. Because everything's going to deteriorate eventually, right? So I'm just playing with tiny amounts now of ferrous sulfate, which is a crystalline iron powder. So, yeah.
How did you evolve from
Do that?
to your, I know that we spoke very
Yeah.
briefly at the Jansen Center, but I'm really curious as to, which came first? Was it your small
This-
ones and then evolved?
My preferred medium has been oils on linen, and I still love painting. But I retired from teaching 2 years ago, and because I've always been a voracious knitter. And after a while, my knitting stash, is anybody in here a knitter? Or, yeah, okay, so few of you. So my stash of yarn was starting to look like my, like hundreds of pastels that I have in my studio, and I was thinking, there's got to be a relationship here, and I know it's somewhere inside of me, and I'm not going to turn my knitting into my art in my studio, but I want to see what the relationship is. But there's, that's like a big leap, and so I knew that when I retired, I wanted to explore that a little bit. So I took a class at MEWA. Some of you may know about MEWA. It's in Vancouver, and they teach a lot of courses that are related to stitching and dyeing and textiles. It's an amazing place. And so I took a class with an incredible woman. She does very abstract stitching. Her name is Christine Mauersberger. And I realized that there was somebody else on earth who's doing what I was trying to figure out how to get to. And then in that class, somebody said something about eco-bundling. And I said, what's that? And they told me what it was, and I thought, what's that? And I don't know, the name doesn't make any sense to me. But so I went home and I started trying to play around with it. But it took a lot of research and a couple more workshops, but mostly research and talking to a lot of people to get to the point where I was getting the results that I wanted on the cloth. And I was in the middle of this series, which I still have so many ideas for. It's okay, Tasha. When I started pulling stuff out of the dye vats that I had to attend to. And so this series is kind of on hold right now.
The piece of wool that you held up, is that the image from one roll job?
Yeah.
Or is that,
Yeah, kind of like altars. And also this wasn't big enough, the dowel wasn't big enough, so I made it in 3 like that and rolled it up.
just once, but
Just one, yeah.
Okay.
And so the thing you have to be careful of, I know I'm out of the, she's trying to videotape this now. She said, stay behind me. The thing that I have to be careful of is if I'm doing weaves on both sides, it's like, how do I choose a side, right? So I started only putting weaves on one side. Because I haven't figured out how to stitch nicely enough that I want to hang it like this and show both sides. So here, I can pass these around.
And over what area of the piece, over what area do you apply the leaves or whatever before you roll it up?
Wherever you want. However much you want. Yeah, sometimes I'm just like putting everything, including the kitchen sink, into it. Sometimes it's just like a few things. And, like if you roll it up, so here in the,
The image roll.
yeah, so it'll repeat itself. And so I don't really like that because I don't want it to be so repetitive.
But you can't prohibit it.
Oh, yes, you can.
Oh, how do you do
There's
that?
ways to go. So you can use a barrier blanket. And so once I put another piece of cloth behind it, when I roll it up, that cloth is going to protect the part that's already been rolled from having that repeat performance. So, and it's like this is really stuff you just learn from just doing it and saying, I don't like what happened here. I really like what happened here, but I have no idea how I did that. And so you have to do it like 5 more times and actually pay attention. So, which, being a painter, it's like, you just sort of, I'm a layerer. The reason why I started doing the bundling, the plant dyeing before the stitching was because my MO with painting was to put something on the surface and let you react to it. and just to keep on layering, rubbing out, and so I really wanted to have something that I could react to on the surface when I started working. So, yeah.
So, have you ever tried working on a more of a translucent fabric?
I'm trying, oh, you mean bundling on it?
Yeah.
I have, and it doesn't dye very distinctly. It's a little bit too vague for me to be happy with it, so I've tried it with a few pieces of silk organza, which is beautiful, but you have to put it on a background then, and so that's something I'm considering, but I just love silk charms. It's so sexy. It's really fun to work with. It's so beautiful to stitch into, and the wool jersey is fabulous too.
Can you talk a little bit about the Japanese influence? Because I know you've got the fans and you've got the scrolls, and I'm not switching off the
No, it's not.
It'd be nice to hear a little bit about that before you stop talking.
Okay, so I'm going to try and encapsulate like 30 years into 2 minutes here. My first graduate degree was in Asian art history and in calligraphy, and I lived in Japan for 5 years. And when I went back to making art and decided to get my MFA, I thought I had like lost all of these years to trying to be an academician, which I decided wasn't where I wanted to go. And of course, it has played itself out in my life like 50-fold, because I'm so influenced by that Asian flavor, and particularly calligraphy, which is so abstract. And for me, marketing is what it's all about. So in April, I went for the first time in 30 years, I went back to Japan, and I actually got that fan paper there because in the spring, leaves don't have high tannin in them, and I was playing in a friend's studio with her, and we couldn't get anything to do contact prints. It just wasn't working, and I was freaking out. I was like, oh my God, I lost my touch. And the magic was gone. But then she pulled out that piece of fan paper from her flat files, and she said, oh, let's put this in there. And so we put it in, and it printed. And so I said, show me where that fan shop is. Because in Japan, like fans are a thing, right? And so you go to the fan shop, and you don't just buy a fan that's made. You can buy fan paper. And you buy it, you're like, well, how many would you like? So I brought my 100 sheets of fan paper with me. And so that's, I haven't even, I barely touched that. But the whole thing with the hanging scrolls is the one that's at the front door. When I pulled that out of the die pot, I looked at it and I thought, oh my goodness, this is a Japanese hanging scroll. I have to mount it. And like a Japanese hanging scroll. Except it's not, because Japanese hanging scrolls are mounted on paper. This is mounted more like a tomra, which is more of a South Asian Buddhist scroll. And so I decided that I wanted to mount it on linen, and I started stitching it. But it was really funny because I've never used a sewing machine before. And I got about this far before I called my friend Sid and said, can you please teach me how to use a sewing machine? Because there is no way I was going to waste all that time like stitching and even trying to do a straight line. So that's how the scrolls evolved. And I do own a sewing machine now, so. Any other questions?
The fan paper, do you know what the fiber content is?
Oh, I have to go back to Japan.
Yeah.
But I can also tell you something about it after. Yeah.
Okay, and also, what have you found about different papers and how they work?
Great question. Okay, so I have all these papers in here from what Tim and I were dyeing last night. And I've been doing this for a while. I'm trying to figure out what papers. So the fan paper is made in Japan. The way that they make paper in Japan is they dip the screen into a vat that has paper pulp in it that's made from mulberry. It's made from the inner scrapings of the mulberry bark. But there's something else in there too, and I can't remember what it is. Maybe Patricia, maybe you know what it is. It's like this mucilaginous stuff from a plant, and they put it in the vat. And so for Japanese paper, you can dip the vat several times, and each time you dip it, you get another very thin layer of fiber. So it's a completely different paper. And my suspicion is that it's that mucilaginous stuff that is on the surface that probably has a high tannin content that was allowing you to plant the leaves this spring. Your other question, watercolor paper and some etching papers work fantastically. And some watercolor papers don't work at all. So I've got like my favorite watercolor papers and then some that we were working with last night. It was like, oh, I really like this, but it doesn't work at all if you don't have any iron in it. But this watercolor paper works great if you just have some tannin in it and no iron. So it's crazy. It's like, it's this ongoing process of...
Have you used any tea?
Oh yes, tea is high tannin, and you can, if you don't have any like plant tannins, like I'm using gallnut right now, which is, the gallnuts, we don't see them here, but they're in, on oak trees, oak galls, is that what they're? And they're more in the Midwest and the East Coast. You can get them around, and at Maywa. I don't mean to, I'm not trying to sell Maywa, but they're amazing stores. So I'm using that for tannin now because it's not colored. And so whatever I'm getting from the plants interacting with the tannin and vinegar in my water, and maybe a touch of iron. But tea works great. It's just that it colors stuff too. Onion skins work great too. Lots of things work great. Yeah.
I have a very quick question about mordants.
Uh-huh.
Are there certain mordants that do certain things, or is it trial and error, or is there sort of a given, for instance, if you use a certain leaf with a certain mordant, such and such happens? I mean, is that kind of given knowledge, or do you experiment on?
With leaf contact printing, I think it's going to take the rest of my life to do the experiments to figure out what does what. Mordants do particular things.
And what are some of the mordants?
So,
iron is one.
There are dozens of mordants, and some of them are simply plants that have a high tannin content because tannin is important, right? So there are lots of them. I would say if you're really interested in that, take a course at Myla with the owner, because I took a course with her last spring. It was a week long, and we produced something like 76 different samples in a week. It was intense, and it was amazing. I learned so much about simply the dyeing process, and what mordants are, and what they do, and none of it really applies to what I'm doing here in some ways, but in other ways it does. So I don't know, I sort of squirrel it.
Well, I know it's a huge area.
It's huge, yeah, it really is. I'm just at the tip of the iceberg. I'm a baby. Any other questions? I think it's time to... all of the monoprints done in this room was work
done actually with my colleague, friend, and a guide in many ways in my work, who's here, and Chris Ekstrand. And so I think it's a wonderful thing that even as we get older, we keep finding people in our lives that help guide us along, and not just when we're young and beginning in our work, but now find these people that are very encouraging. I brought a few show and tell things for the bronze casting. I was very, Jennifer, I wanted to just say that it's wonderful to see your work. I've just met these two women for the first time, and my work began in ceramics many, many years ago. That's my background. So it's wonderful to see these ceramic forms that I really like very much, and her process, and also the contrast of our work with the object making and this wonderful, thoughtful attention to surface and tactile detail. It's just, it's a really interesting coming together of our, can't see without me. So, I just wanted to say that over the years, that my work has appeared in many forms and materials, and there was a long period of time that I felt uncomfortable with moving through so many kinds of work and materials, and that I was all over the map. And this plagued me for some reason, and many people said, well, it's not an issue. Obviously, there's a thread in your work. To me, I could see that. And so, but I've never felt comfortable really with that, feeling that possibly moving through all these kinds of work and doing them simultaneously, that I was really unfocused. But I'm not sure that question got answered in visiting a fabulous show Jeff and I went to, my husband, who's here tonight, about over 10 years ago. We went to SF MoMA in San Francisco, which is a fabulous museum. And great Caesar salad, of course, in the cafe. Wonderful to go for that. But we went specifically to see Anselm Kiefer show upstairs it was in the second floor, I believe, a huge exhibition of his work. And it was overwhelming to walk in and see the scale of these paintings, which went up clear to where the roof began, and to see his painting, which is the presence of them physically is overpowering, but also, of course, the emotional content of what he deals with, and post-war Germany, dealing with the guilt and sort of the grief of what went on, and still, in many ways an issue. But to walk in and see this work and just really be moved to the point of having to sit on the floor at the gallery in the museum. And of course along came a guard and said, will you please stand up? We don't do that. I was like, okay, so I stood up, but I was so moved, and I think that the power of art in our lives is not to be underestimated, and it was so interesting to respond to his paintings and then see his absolutely inspiring sculptural objects, which went from constructions to spatial arrangements of sheets of lead that were 10 to 15 feet tall, leaned up, stacked together in a really kind of a scary way. You didn't want to get too close to them, thinking they might fall on you. And then pieces, shards of the lead all over the floor of the museum. And I was so struck by the beauty of this, and also just the straightforwardness of this work. And so I thought, well, I love this work. It's really moving. And I walked around the corner from this sculptural work, and here on this wall was this quiet row like these of beautiful watercolor landscapes, of bucolic landscapes that he had done, and they were included in the show. And I just, that answered that question of being concerned about doing too many different things in your work and in your life, that it didn't matter in any way what form you are working in. It's not unfocused. I'm not sure what I felt like by seeing those beautiful watercolors, that it was actually a very genuine expression of the beauty of their landscape and where he lived and lives. And it also could have been shown in contrast to the other. But that kind of was, I wanted to bring that up because you'll see here in this show objects of bronze, which originated as wooden objects. As you can see, that its counterpart is over there. I actually showed these at a show at Anchor Art Space in Anacortes when that was in existence. I think it was the last show I put these in. And I have a strong affinity for wood objects, which I find around. These are found objects put together. I believe this is a yew log. And this is I found out much later, a paddle. This, if I was to pull this white part out and hold it, it's a paddle used for cleaning carpet. And I found that out from a Russian man at the bronze foundry who said, "Oh yes, my grandmother had them." So that was great to know the origin, but I just love its strange tool quality, but also just the way if put together, it reads somewhat physically like a talisman, I don't know if that's the right word, but a figurative form. But certainly for me, it kind of became markers in some way. So I thought of them that way. As like anything piled vertically. You see a lot of people pile rocks by their driveway. And I did a series of objects. There's another one there. Behind the black one is sort of a kinship to this piece. But I began with the wood and painted it in black and white, and I showed it, and I liked them, okay. But then once I brought them back home, I thought, you know, they really are just in a transition, and would these be much stronger in another material? And I thought, well, they really lend themselves to be bronze objects. So that's why I took these right down to the foundry. I contacted a foundry in South Seattle who had a reasonable, looked like a reasonable process, and worked with them. The unifying of the object itself by making it all one color really helped them, I think. And so these came out of that woodwork. This, around my home, where I live on Lopez Island, there's lots of wood everywhere. There's piles of things and sticks, and I collect these pieces of wood and have always, I'm not sure if it was enjoying what William T. Wiley's painting from years ago, but just the sense of humor in the object is important to me, but also the attachment of them, these pieces coming together was important. And this piece at one time in wood was another 5 feet tall or something. So it was pretty good size, and I thought, well, maybe this is enough to cast a run. These have a tool-like quality, even though the titles, which come much later, the titles always seem, I don't know how many artists ever title their work before they get to a finished point. You just, oh, well, that's the last thing I'm concerned about. And I thought about it, and I was like, well, it really does appear to be a tree with missing parts, and then they all have a tool quality. So I think the title of this is "Device to Measure What's Left." And I do think about the decline of much of what's going on in our world, and I do think about these things. But the making of the objects is a delight, and being in the studio and making, it's a wonderful privilege. Becky Fletcher's talked about this a number of times, how enjoyable it is to work in our studios, and how lucky we are to have that. As far as process, I brought this is a work in process, it's just begun, but this is a really large barnacle, surprisingly. And But I collected this, I don't know where I found this, I have so many odd things, but there's many odd things that I really, you collect and you refer to, and somehow they're still there in your life 10 years later. But this was one that I've had in the studio for a long time, so I took it to the foundry, and I said I'd like to make multiples of these for an installation. And something that, there's another artist that shows here that his work is about making objects much like this. But, so the process goes, you take the object to the foundry, they make a synthetic mold. This would probably be a 2-part mold around this object, and then they, I wasn't doing it, they cast a wax into the resin mold, take the wax out, they cast a plaster, many layers of plaster investment around by dipping and drying the wax into the plaster. It creates an investment mold. They burn the wax out of the investment mold. This is gone. They're left with just a hollow shape within the plaster mold. And Jeff was saying how they warm up the mold before pouring bronze into the mold. I've done it when I was in Italy, but it was so many years ago, I don't really remember. And the hot bronze is poured directly, and it's ancient. It's an ancient, incredible process. It's really laborious and really expensive, often prohibitive. But once it's cast, it's there. It's a very final statement way of working. So you pretty much have to want that thing cast forever. Whatever you're casting, you're going to have to, you'll be seeing it around long after you're gone. And but I felt like these wooden objects lend themselves very well to the process. And they were shown last year in San Juan Museum out there. And we did a show that was up for a couple months. Apart from the brief process aspects of this, I wanted to just talk about my background just briefly. I was born in Yakima, and a lot of my family's from that side of the mountains. But when I was very young, my dad brought us all over in a very old beat-up car, brought us across the pass, and he bought a cabin in what's now Bellevue. And so it's a completely transformed neighborhood. But at that time, it was a fairly normal neighborhood. And my brother says that, if you can imagine, Dad bought a home that was a duck club. And so it was this little cabin, a duck club, which for hunting ducks. Because a lot of these areas were used by Seattleites to come to the country to somehow get across the lake. Before the bridges, there were boats, there were old ferries at one time to cross the lake. And they would go to the country in Bellevue and pick raspberries and hunt ducks. And it was a very different world. So my dad moved there we moved there in 57, and I was raised there. And it was a wonderful place to grow up because the woods were filled with beautiful big cedar and fir trees. And so I realized much later that living on Lopez, I'm surrounded by a lot of fir trees and arbutus trees, but there's this motion, there's this movement happening above us and around us that I wasn't quite aware of till I had to sit down and write about it for art statements. And I thought how comforting in many ways, but how familiar that action is of this movement. And that not a fan of growing up in the gray, and so relieved to have the sun come out. But at the same time, when I travel and I come back home, I'm so happy to be back in this environment. And that growing up there, I just had a very natural affinity kinship with wood and trees, and being out, had the freedom as a child to go out and run around and play in the woods. for hours without anyone ever worrying. And we had to be home at night. But there was Lake Washington surrounding us, this cold, dark, beautiful lake. And so it was a really a wonderful place to grow up. And I just wanted to say that was my origin. And I think that when I began to move away from the area, I went to Canada, lived in the wilderness also up there, but I was unable to really make art. And as a young person, I was interested in clay very much. And so when I had the opportunity, I made the move to Idaho to the Sun Valley Art Center, where we were able to live like a bunch of puppies in a pile and make art all day. And we had mentors and guides and scholars and visiting artists came through, and it was just the most amazing experience to be able to be immersed in art and art making and friendship with people who valued much of the same things. We didn't eat very well. I mean, we ate burritos and cookies, but I think that was kind of my coming to terms with the fact that art was a fabulous, serious, important, unimportant, playful activity that I loved. And one night I stayed up all night with my clay, and I'd been making very small things. And I stayed up all night and made, literally, it was close to a ton of clay in a mixer, and dumped it all in this community room floor, and I made something bigger than myself. It was a big mural. And at that point I came to recognize the relationship, how important that the art making could be in my life as an activity. So from there I went to graduate school in Texas and followed a mentor down there, and got to enjoy a whole other part of the country and culture, and coming home, returning home for my family was really a positive thing. But it's been wonderful lately to learn about printmaking, and this printmaking that you see here is the result of working at Chris's studio, and it's a very encouraging environment, and I think I now have a press myself at home, but it's a wonderful thing to do with other people, and so it's a great shared activity to be in a room and do printmaking. I think are there any questions about this work or anything else? I may be at a stopping point. The nurse log bronze piece behind Patty was a log I found on my husband's property at his studio, and I just couldn't resist the actual log itself. When I walked by, it was in a junk pile, and I just was so stunned because it's a beautiful piece of wood that was probably on the beach at one time, got up away from the beach, and then somebody took a saw to it. But ever since I became aware of the role of the nurse log in our forests and the regeneration that comes from that, I was just astounded at that, seeing that wonderful log at the sculpture park in Seattle they have there. I forgot the artist's name. It's a living sculpture. And apart from the gloom and doom of so many things that we could really be very mad and sad about environmentally, it's been wonderful to think about the role of the nurse log because of its regenerative properties. So that's where that came from, and the plastic branches are a result, well, they were plastic at one time, and they're the result of collecting things you would see in your grandmother's home in 1950 on the wall to decorate their idealistic forms of branches. So I think that I probably will do some more bronze at one time, maybe scale back. this wood piece here. This is cast 3 times, and they're very similar, but this was a beautiful, I can actually pick this up. This is a beautiful chunk of firewood that, oh, it's nicely stuck there. But
you should
pop it up.
You should.
And so this was a fabulous piece of firewood that I found in my nephew's firewood pile on Locust. And I said, "Can I have that?" And he said, "Yeah, sure, you cheap." But I donated one of these to the auction, and I think of all the stuff I've ever made, I had more response from artists and also art lovers that said, "Oh, I really like that thing." And it's titled Joe's Slice. My nephew's name is Joe, and it just so made me think of a piece of cake and just how we just kind of adore dessert, but just this lovely shape. So that's where these came from. There's cards in the back that have this came from. I'm not sure how this was placed so nicely, but stick that back there.
A little to the left.
Thank you, Lisa. So, are there any questions before I finish?
I just wanted to say that the piece of firewood has a very close relation to the architectural pieces. I mean, to me, I thought those were an extension. I haven't seen the show before.
Do you mean this?
No, I'm the ceramic pieces.
Oh, yeah.
The architectural
Yes.
design, I mean,
Yeah.
that could be a very stark building. And so it had a very strong architectural quality.
Right.
Now I see
They
it.
do kind of look also like the cliffs of Dover. I think.
Yeah, that's also came to mind.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. It's and yeah, I really like showing both these artists because of there's some nice kinships. I forgot what I was going to say about what I saw as a kinship with our work, but the facets and the architectural quality is wonderful in Jennifer's work. And are there any other questions at all? Okay. Thank you.
Our gallery manager, Lucy, this is our last show with her. Lucy is going to be returning to her business, her family business that has continued to grow. And I mean, she could tell you more about exactly why, but it's a wonderful business. It's a family thing. And I think she's making a good decision in that she's going to focus her energies full time on that. So it is her gain, but it is most definitely our loss here at the gallery. In the last 11 years that I've run this gallery and done this business, I've worked with a lot of talented people that have helped me do it. But I think none more passionate about the artwork and even more so about the artists than Lucy. I mean, she has got an energy and an intensity and a passion for the people that do this, and she's very, very beloved, and will be terribly missed around here. But the thing about Lucy is she goes everywhere and does everything. So she will not be hard to find around here and at just about every other art event and whatnot. So I know I could go on and on, but I shan't. Jean wanted to say a few things on behalf of all of the artists that I've had the pleasure of working with Lucy over the years. So.
Hey Lucy, hiding in this bag. It's just a bouquet of flowers. We love you so much. And I I could also go on and on, but just what a lovely welcome you've given all of us and treated us so beautifully. All of us, there's so many artists here that have been in your hands for years, and I've had a lot of different experiences, but I've never had this kind of reception from any professional gallery any time in my life, except here and with you. So thank you.
Thank you.
I don't have to talk because I'm not that
You don't want to make it through.
Well, I don't know even what to say, so I've missed so much here. And so honored. I mean, I could go on and on about the artists that I've been, worked with. So honored and trusted to be in this position and handling artwork and in the best gallery ever, anywhere. And I felt that way long before I was a part of it, and will continue to be at all the openings and still probably selling art during conversation. So I thank everybody, and there's a lot of people that aren't here that I have thanked, just entrusting me in this position. So, and Andrew and Wes, of course, I've known them for a long time, and I will greatly miss being here. So,
and I just wanted to add, when Andrew said that Lucy was returning to her family business, it's not exactly like she's going back to being a bookkeeper, because she's a stone monument maker, for those of you who don't know her. And that's going to be very exciting to watch. Thank you.
Thank you for being so good.
So now we can open some
Okay.
wine